the political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. It wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
Gale, I was just curious if you could tell people, you know, you've heard that term. I've heard the term a lot, like I'm a producer, and you are obviously a very famous producer. I mean, mega, some of the biggest names ever done. But what does it mean? I know what a writer is, and I think the public knows what a writer is, but what does a producer do? Like, I'm curious as to, like, how do you describe what a producer does? And I know that is a probably wide definition, but I'm just curious as to sort of like how you explain it to a layman.
Well, it's a very good question. And it's something that when I was on the board of the Producers Guild, we worked very hard on defining it, because we are not a union or a guild, so we're not a collective bargaining unit, which means that anyone can call themselves a producer. And they don't really need to have performed the functions of a producer. What are the functions of a producer? It's essentially finding the material from the very beginning. That may be identifying a piece of intellectual property, or hearing a pitch from a writer and deciding to develop it, partnering with a writer director from the very beginning. But essentially the job of a producer is to be one of the originators of the project and following it through all the way through completion of the film, having arranged financing, creating a schedule and budget, working with the director to determine who the heads of department are going to be, the casting, and then all the way through distribution and marketing.
Does a producer hire the director?
In each case, it's a little different, but I would say in at least 60 to 70% of the films that I've made, yes, I hired the director.
And then in terms of ownership of the project, this is where Hollywood is very confusing to me. I've actually been invited so many times to finance films, and I've always just been so fearful of the idea of how I would get paid back. You know, it seems like, you know, when you hear about Forrest Gump never making any money in Hollywood math, it makes no sense to me, right? But, you know, obviously actors get paid, producers get paid. Do they get paid because they put together a budget and say this is the producing fee, or do they get paid on the sales of the movie, or do they get paid on all of the above?
We get paid based on negotiating our contracts with the financier or the studio. And then there is a back end, sometimes, as you point out, which depends on what you've been able to negotiate. And if there are any players already involved or who become involved who get first dollar gross, which essentially means they're getting paid. And if you are a net participant, every time that person gets paid, you are further and further away from break even.
Got it. So obviously I'm not going to ask you anything personal about how you get paid, but I mean, you did produce one of the most famous movies around, my wife's favorite movie, Terminator. You actually wrote it too, that's what I was told. And it was beyond, I mean, there's like no way to describe how big of a hit that was, obviously. It's still iconic, etc. But is that something that you, like someone like you still would get paid on? Like if you were the producer and the writer and it gets replayed over and over again? Is that business model still there in terms of someone who's aspiring to be a producer or a writer? Do they still get paid for that movie?
It really depends on the deal that you've negotiated. In the case of Terminator, sadly, the company that produced it, Hemdale, went bankrupt. The company that produced Terminator 2, once again, these are both very successful films, also went bankrupt. So that tends to extinguish a great deal of one's profit participation.
So when you said they produced it, did they, this is, you know, the funny
They financed it. So they were the company that stepped up and financed, or in the case of Hemdale, co-financed the production.
Mm. And is the process of doing this like, I got to assume, I mean, see, the interesting thing about you, and I've interviewed some other people in Hollywood, is that you have had nothing but iconic movies, or maybe I'm only looking at the movies that you have done that are iconic, but like The Terminator, Aliens, Armageddon, The Incredible Hulk, Walking Dead, The Search for Sarah Connor Chronicle. I mean, these are just like iconic scenarios here. Is it because you, once you had the success of Terminator, you just kept going and going and going, or because as a producer, you know how to get it done? Is that more the value? Is that, hey, I had a successful movie, and then now people get on and say, hey, we know that Gale can get this done. Is that sort of a normal process? Because it doesn't seem like there's any playbook for what happens in Hollywood.
There is no playbook, and I've made quite a few projects that weren't hits, and they are not exclusively in science fiction, fantasy, horror, and comic book. But yes, people tend to trust you after you've had a couple of successes. But that doesn't guarantee that if you've had a few failures, that the reset button is back to, okay, we want to work with this person again. It tends to be, flavor of the moment.
Did you going to Stanford have any like reason why you were successful in your opinion, or was that an unnecessary expense?
I wouldn't be in the film business if I hadn't gone to Stanford. That was not a result of Stanford, which has essentially tried to extinguish their film and television courses since I graduated, but because of the people that I interacted with who were there at the time, which is the mid-'70s. So Julian Blaustein was my mentor and advisor, and he had produced the original Day the Earth Stood Still. So I was learning from a seasoned professional who had enormous success in the business. And I attended Stanford in Britain, which at the time had an intensive program in economics, which was my major at the time, and also British film and broadcasting. And that was when I had the most intensive exposure to both film and documentaries.
I've got to think that people who want to be in the movie industry are going to be really excited to see this. But one thing I noticed is that you wrote a thesis on, if I'm correct, on Space Odyssey, and one of my favorite.
I did for a class, interestingly called Five American Directors, and a professor, Stephen Kovacs, who went to work for Roger Corman, and is how I got the job working for Roger Corman. I wrote my thesis on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and as you can tell, that film has resonated through my career, including with my first independent film, The Terminator.
Yeah, and there's some crazy stuff in that movie that is real life today, and I actually talk about this because we own an AI company called askROI, and the idea that open the bay door, Hal.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Weirdly, what I see happening now versus, I'm 55, or excuse me, I'm going to be 55 in December, is that, and I'm a big philosophy major guy. I love philosophy. I love the idea of connecting the dots, and one of them is that Hollywood seems to be ahead of the future. And I was curious if you had any thoughts on how stuff you make before it seems to be coming true today. And I say that with like Skynet and Odyssey and other things. Like, is that just a coincidence, or do you think there's something in the universe that makes it so that movie making is a precursor to the future?
I tend to credit science fiction authors. They had a huge impact on me. Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury and so many others, because they're the ones I believe are the futurists, and we follow in their footsteps and are inspired by them. But Jim and I named the nightclub in The Terminator Tech-Noir because we felt it was important for people, audiences, to be aware that there can be a dark side to tech innovation.
Can you tell me where you are?
I'm in this bar called Tech-Noir.
Yeah, I know it. It's on Pico. Are you all right?
Yeah, but I don't want to leave. I think there's a guy following me.
So I'm not necessarily one who subscribes to the move fast and break things approach, especially when what can be broken is humanity and the world as we know it. When I went back to Stanford, I had to complete my second bachelor's in essentially a year, which meant I was taking a number of classes. And through those classes, I had 3 from a professor named Stephen Kovacs, who was hired by Roger Corman to be the head of production. Now you've got to remember, this is the 70s. There was no internet to look up someone. You know, you couldn't find out. There were no books at the time on Roger Corman. If I hadn't been someone who attended a lot of drive-in movies, which he had directed, I wouldn't have known who Roger Corman was. But I was hired by Roger, probably in the antithesis of Peter Thiel, who believes that people shouldn't go to college and encourages them to drop out. Having the highest grade point average in the communications department actually secured me my first job, because Roger wanted a stellar academic with a degree in communication. So I went to work for him, and essentially from the first job interview, when he said, "What do you want to do for your career?" To be honest, I hadn't thought about that, because I assumed I'd be Roger's assistant for a very, very long time. But that's not how it works when you're working for the late Roger Corman. And I realized with my degree in economics and my love for film that producing would probably be the career path for me. And within 2 years of working for Roger Corman, having done every job imaginable, including running the marketing department for his company, New World Pictures, Roger had me produce my first film for him, which was not The Terminator. It was a movie called Smokey Bites the Dust.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Peter Thiel and the idea that not going to college. I just don't think it's a straight line like that, you know?
I think everyone's path is different.
Yeah.
I really do.
Gail, I would agree with you. I dropped out of college to pursue a career on Wall Street, and nobody really asked me about whether I graduated. And I never lied. I just said I attended. And I don't have regret about not finishing, but I'm a believer that if I would have taken it a little more seriously and had a little bit more formal financial training, I would have basically not made as many mistakes as I've made in my life, and I have failed forward. I mean, we're a big company now, bigger than we used to be, a lot bigger. But what failures have you had that you've had to fail forward from? Because I got to assume you can't make all these movies, and these are like, I'm looking at it's insanity what you produced. It's insanity. Like, you can't deny that you have, like, just amazing stuff. I mean, it's just amazing, right? So, what's went wrong for you?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because one of the most important lessons I learned from Roger was that you surprisingly don't really learn from your successes, you learn from your failures.
Yeah.
And that is something I remind myself when I experience a setback. So it took 2 years to get The Terminator financed. And seriously, and you probably know this in the businesses that you've created, what you do as a film producer is you're a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah. Every
film, every TV series, you're starting from scratch, you're putting together a new team, and you're selling it. So it was Roger Corman and the encouragement of other people I met through Roger Corman, who kept me and obviously Jim Cameron going when we essentially had at least 99 turndowns.
Roger was a low-budget guy, though. Wasn't he the pioneer kind of low-budget film? So, but you went and produced The Terminator. So I'm kind of, it doesn't seem congruent with me that you coming out of Roger's shop is you doing these. I mean, these are some of the most expensive movies at the time ever made.
Well, Terminator cost $6.4 million, so it was not expensive at all.
Is that true? Wow. Is that real? Wow. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
It was 84.
And the other thing to remember is that in terms of directors, long before I worked for him, Roger started the careers of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Ron Howard, and you know, it's his impact on the American independent cinema is legendary, and I can't imagine where we would be without his influence.
You got a favorite film he's made?
That Roger himself directed?
Yeah.
You know, he made a film that was remarkable, and he, you know, didn't recall it as fondly as many of us who've seen it since, because it was a message movie. It was called The Intruder, starring William Shatner, about racism in the South.
Mm.
And I think it's fantastic. But the lesson that he learned from that failure at the box office was, you know, if you want to send a message, you know, back in the day we would say use Western Union. So instead he focused on low budget, what was called then exploitation films.
So it took you 3 years to get the money for the $6.4 million for Terminator?
Yes, it did.
And you got the money and you made the film and it was released. And
correct.
And do you know at this point how much money it's made total?
At this point, no. I mean, it's, you know, it certainly must be close to 200 million, maybe more.
Yeah, that would seem hard to believe that it was only 200 million for the Terminator. Really?
I don't know. As I said, the things really changed when Hemdale financed the film, went bankrupt.
Who? Just out of curiosity, do you know who owns the Terminator now?
Yes, it was. So the rights ended up being acquired by MGM, and then MGM was acquired by Amazon. So it's Amazon.
Yeah, I knew the answer to that question because one of my favorite human beings in the whole world is a guy named Kirk Kerkorian. Whether you like him or not, he had a, and I don't know that you do or not. I'm not commenting whether you do or not, but he is someone I've admired, and I knew that he had acquired some rights in the 80s, but it's very confusing to me how someone gets that. What's AI doing to your industry?
You know, it's potentially revolutionizing it, and the concern really is how many people will be put out of work.
Mm.
You know, when you see demonstrations, it turns out that some of the ones we thought were legitimately generated by AI entirely weren't. But regardless, that puts out of business so many people in, you know, art department and post-production in terms of visual effects. You know, if the algorithm ultimately gets it right, you know, there could be, you know, writers, directors, producers put out of business. I mean, someone's going to have to supervise, but I think it's unclear as to who that will be going forward.
Would you enter the business today if you had a choice? Like if you were brand new, would you do it?
You know, when you're passionate about something, it's hard to, you know, turn your back on it and pursue something else.
Mm.
So I think I would still try, but I would counsel most people not to give up their day job.
Ouch. Wow. 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 That's not to give up their day job. Do you have a genre that you like, your favorite? I mean, we talked about sci-fi, but is that your favorite?
I tend to go back to theme. And the theme that resonates for me in everything that I've done is ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances who don't believe that they have got the skill set to survive or win or save the world, whatever it might be, and who find the courage within themselves. I like celebrating ordinary people, and that's true whether it's Sarah Connor in The Terminator, a documentary I did, Wilma Mankiller, about Wilma Mankiller, the first woman elected principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, The Walking Dead, you name it. It tends to resonate across all of my projects.
Did it resonate for Sigourney Weaver? Is that why you did that project?
Aliens, well, Aliens was not a project that I originally developed. Jim wrote the script when we were waiting to make Terminator, and he wasn't committed at that point to directing. But they needed a producer on the film, 20th Century Fox, which financed and distributed the film, and control the rights. So so we were able to reach an agreement. It was not easy, because clearly going from an independent film, and by the way, I don't know if you know, but Aliens cost $14 million.
Wow.
Which may be even more remarkable than Terminator costing 6.4. But so that's how I ended up getting involved in Aliens. But yes, Sigourney plays an ordinary person. You know, we meet her. She's working with a exoskeleton power loader on the loading docks. You can't get more ordinary than that. But what's extraordinary about her is that she's the only, survivor of an encounter with this alien species.
Is it impossible to do movies for the same price? Not the exact same dollar amount, but it seems like some of these budgets are astronomical now. Is it possible to do movies for those kind of prices now?
I think that's why everyone is so excited about AI, is the potential that AI has to bring the budget down. Because in many instances, it is the spectacle that costs so much, and the spectacle being, car chases and visual effects and, stunts, etc. And I'd like to see more use of CGI in making. Still, I believe there should be jobs for stunt people, but in making that as safe as possible. Because these stuntmen are risking their lives every day.
This topic comes up all the time, and for me, in terms of, you talk about independent versus not independent. Can you define that? What made that Terminator independent relative to something like Aliens, which was done by 20th Century Fox? Is it because they have distribution and they have the money and they have this sort of, what makes it, is it a one-stop shop environment that makes it non-independent? What makes it independent?
Well, an independent film is not financed and distributed by the major studios, and as we're watching now, they're dwindling the number of major studios, and so the Terminator was financed completely out of the system, and it was released by what was called at the time a mini major, Orion Pictures. So it from the very beginning it was independent. And in fact, this is the 40th anniversary of the film, because it came out in 1984. And then a studio film is one in which the studio controls all aspects. In other words, they control the intellectual property, and in many cases, they more often now than previously have final cut, so they can create the final version even after the director. And then they distribute in, not only theatrically, but every other ancillary.
Do you have a preference as to how it's done?
I think it's horses for courses. You know, obviously, if you're going to make an expensive tentpole film, you want the resources of a large, major studio. Plus, they have the financing to market the film to be able to reach an audience.
You lived aboard on a dive boat. Why did you do that?
Well, I didn't live on it, but I did create a business, a live aboard scuba diving business. After making The Abyss, I developed a passion for diving, not in the tanks where we shot the film, but in the ocean.
Yeah.
And Jim insisted that I get certified in scuba in order to produce the film, because he felt anyone who was not aware of the rigors and demands and dangers of scuba diving, given that we were actually putting actors in the water, would not be sufficiently qualified to produce the film.
I was going to say, I honestly can say that I've been a scuba diver for, I don't know, 30 years and done some of the stupidest, most dangerous things you could do as a scuba diver. And there's other things that are probably more dangerous than I did. I did a lot of night cave diving. And it's one of the, you being a scuba diver, it's one of the coolest things ever. But I don't know that I really paid attention when I was younger how risky it was. And the stupid things that I did. You know, to do that. Do you still scuba dive today?
I do, but you know, it was, when you're a serial entrepreneur, you can't help yourself. So you often turn avocations into vocations. So I set up with my partners, live aboard dive boats in the Federated States of Micronesia, in what was called then Truck Lagoon, but it's now Chuk, and also in the Republic of Palau.
Oh, really? Wow. Wow, we're way out there. I scuba dived in Catalina and off the coast of Laguna and Florida and Hawaii. you were definitely doing.
Yeah, I've done lots of Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, incredibly remote places as well.
Wow. I've done some drift diving in Cozumel and stuff like that, but nothing nothing in the Indonesia area. Wow, there must be some amazing fish life there. I've always wanted to dive the Red Sea because there's like semi-lavardis there and really amazing fish. But well, you've been to some great places. My producer Christy is a mermaid at the local casino, so she had to get certified. So she's like in a mermaid outfit underneath the water in the casino, has to breathe every few minutes. It's you know. Anyways, I love scuba diving, and I think that's exciting you do that. And, you know, it's a different world. You're exploring, I guess it kind of goes into what you create in terms of science fiction. When you go watch one of your movies, you're kind of engrossed in something that you really can't do. You get that 2 hours of really transcending into something different. And you've made so many of them, especially The Abyss, by the way. Another, I mean, the list of stuff you've made is just insane, and I gotta ask, like, and I know you have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but like, what are you doing now, and what do you plan on doing?
Well, now the Walking Dead universe continues to expand, so there are more and more spin-offs to that, which is very gratifying, given that you know, it started as a project that most places passed on, and no one ever imagined it was going to become the hit that it did, and it spawned all of these spin-offs, and our ensemble cast have all become leads in their own right. So that's exciting. And then the last documentary that I did was dealing with disinformation, misinformation, radicalization online. It's called The YouTube Effect. And we focus just on YouTube. But clearly, I think that one of the problems that we're facing today that's responsible for a lot of the division in the world is as a result of the amplification of hatred and disinformation.
Well, there definitely is a lot of that, and I'm obviously not going to get into the politics side of it, but there is a lot of, I was thinking about that last night when I looked at my feed on Instagram, and I thought to myself, I sure get a lot of anti one particular way. And I go, it would be nice if I got to see both sides, but I get like pretty much one side, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the algorithm is doing for you. It's determining what content you see.
Right.
But so at the moment, I have a number of projects that I'm pitching. I can't talk about them, sadly, but just set up something new at Netflix. And because of the strike last year, everything slowed down. So we're starting another cycle of setting up projects and hopefully making them.
I'm a financier. I do finance a lot of public companies, and I'm curious, I've been very afraid to finance movies and stuff like this. Do people get paid back on the financing of the movies? I'm not talking about like whether the movie makes money or not, but do they get paid back? Like you're not borrowing money from me. I'm not financing your movie. So this is just you and I. Like, if I put up $5 million for a movie and you made it and it got distributed, do I actually get a check back, or does that not happen?
It's a case by case basis, as with anything. And I think that we've been going through a tumultuous time in the industry, and I believe that everyone's getting their feet back under them now, and that's the studios, the streamers, the networks, and we were living in a content explosion. So now we are seeing content revert to, I think, a more sustainable volume. And I do believe that there is profitability out there. Generally, the way that it works is someone would underwrite a film, and you would want to make sure that that you had a cast and a team that would be of interest to buyers. And generally, those independent films are shown at a film festival and then purchased by a distributor from the film festival. And so there are a number of barriers. First is you have to get into the film. First, you have to make the movie on schedule and on budget. Secondly, you have to get into the festival, and thirdly, you want to be picked up for distribution out of a film festival.
Right. So, but if I financed a film and I put up $5 million for the film, there's a mechanism if I sold it at the film festival for me to get my money back.
Yes, I mean that's the whole point. Is that for example, I know that there are films that have been made even without going to festivals that had a big box office name, where they made the film for, let's say, $10 million and sold it for $18 million. So that's a pretty good return on investment.
Right. But is every case a case-by-case basis who handles the money? Because it seems like to me that Hollywood is rife with these deals where people don't always get their. I mean, obviously the movies continue to get made, but is it really standardized now, or is it still just the Wild West a little bit?
It's the Wild West, and there are people that just don't have a good reputation. There's a reason for that. There are two sets of books. So there's the set of books that they're using to actually make the film, and it's often less than what the financier gave them. And then they give them a different set of books to show how they spent all of the money, when actually what they did was make it for considerably less and pocket the difference. I surprisingly have dealt with one of those companies, and am very, I do a lot more groundwork now in checking people out before I commit to doing business with them.
What's the very favorite thing you've ever made ever? Like and maybe you already answered that, but if I'm going to ask it again because I don't remember you saying it, but what's the very first, if you had to pick one, like you have to shoot all your kids, nobody can live. You got to pick one that people have to watch that you produced, made, you were involved with, you wrote. What is that one film?
The Terminator, because without its success, I wouldn't have been able to do it again.
Wow. Wow. Well, I will tell you that my wife loves that. I mean, really, honestly, and I bet you hear that from everyone, that is such an iconic movie. Are you still, do you still associate or talk to or do things with James Cameron or Arnold Schwarzenegger or anybody like that? Or do you still have like a favored person you do business with, or is it evolved over all these movies you've made?
Well, Jim and I actually just did an interview because the film, because it's its 40th anniversary, is going to be screened in at least 80 cinemas.
Wow.
Across the country on July 25th, which is, I believe, Art House Theater Day.
Mm.
And so in many of those venues, they're going to screen this interview that Jim and I did only a few weeks ago. So we've stayed in close touch.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in touch with Arnold, but we haven't worked together recently.
Mm.
So, you know, so Jim and I are hoping to do more screenings and appear in person together in the fall. I've been screening the film on my own and doing Q&As, you know, in the UK recently, and I have plans to do that in many other countries as well.
Do you want to do another blockbuster? Do you want to do something that's like big and bold and different now, or are you sort of set on The Walking Dead and what you're doing now? I mean, do you have it in you?
You know, it's really not about do I want to make a blockbuster, because the truth is, I make things because the story and the characters appeal to me, and then you determine what the budget's going to be. Where
are most movies getting produced and made now?
It's certainly not Los Angeles. It varies. It depends entirely on the incentives. So the higher the incentive, and for a long period of time, it's been Canada and the state of Georgia, and that's where people go. It's really, that's it, period. And having a sufficient crew base so that more than one film can be made at a time.
I've heard that about Georgia. What's is it because of
Tyler Perry? But Tyler Perry decided not to expand his studios. But yes, in fact, we did shoot a number of episodes of The Walking Dead there. But it's because, you know, of the enormous tax rebate.
My producer wants me to ask you about how do you say it? Sora. This well, we kind of talked about a little bit.
Apparently, the demonstration we all saw was fabricated.
You know, it's funny you say that. I kind of felt like I saw it and I thought to myself, I don't know that is something that's ready to go right now. But I saw it on CNBC and they were blowing it up everywhere, and it was, you know, sort of this fabulous promotional video, right?
All right, OpenAI has unveiled its new text-to-video model. It's calling it Sora. It generates videos up to 1 minute long based on whatever prompt a user types into a text box. Take this, for example. If you use the prompt, the camera directly faces colorful building in Burano, Italy. An adorable Dalmatian looks through a window on a building on the ground floor. Many people are walking and cycling along the canal streets in front of the buildings. This is what you get. Wow, look at that. We're done. I think it's time to hand in your resignation, everybody.
But for your knowledge, you thought it was more fabricated and not something that's...
Well, I read that it was. It's not really, I don't have any insider knowledge. But I read that, once again, you know, you never know if what you're reading is going to be information or misinformation. So take that with a grain of salt. But I did hear that it was not, it was it was manipulated in some way, shape, or form.
I'm curious about, and I really don't want to go political, but I'm curious about whether when you say misinformation, are you referring to political information, like governmental information, or are you referring to anyone that has an agenda that can put out this misinformation?
Well, okay, so there's a difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is where someone knows that what they are promoting is wrong. And they're doing it with an agenda of making, of converting people to embrace something that's simply not true. Now, obviously, that is very often the case with the Russian troll farms, with North Korea, you name it. And then misinformation is when people believe the disinformation and then spread it themselves.
Where would someone see the YouTube effect? Is it on a particular streaming network?
You can, you can just do a search, and it's available pay per download most places. Whether it's, interestingly enough, YouTube, Google Play, iTunes, etc.
Well, I appreciate you being with us. Obviously, congratulations on what, obviously you're still doing stuff, but what an amazing run of amazing stuff you've done. And you've definitely affected the culture. I mean, you've done so many iconic things that, is it weird for you to hear them repeated, things you've written that have become like part of the American and global lexicon? I'm curious as to how that makes you feel, because you got to know that some things that have been said, like you didn't write the one in Jaws about we're going to need a bigger boat, but you have things in Terminator that are just like there's just no way to, everyone knows where they came from. I'm curious as to what you think about that.
It was certainly not something Jim and I thought would happen, so it's gratifying that it has. I think that the most surprising thing to me is that a few years ago I visited the Pentagon, and I did not expect this many years later to see posters of the Terminator in the Pentagon. So I think that was one of the more unusual discoveries that I made, was that it has a lot of fans in the Pentagon. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know.
So when you made the Terminator and it was successful, was there like one person in your life, like a parent or something, that was like the most proud of you, that you can remember that moment where you knew that it was some iconic thing you did? Is there something that you've done, whether it's the Walk of Fame or something that you've had that you said, hey, like that this is the epiphany or the apex of your career, where you had a family member or friend like blown away?
I think it was the late Roger Corman,
right,
who took me out to dinner after the Terminator and said, so proud of you. The film is an enormous achievement, tremendous success. And I want to give you some advice, which is that we're in an industry that will try to tell you that it's a fluke, that it won't happen again, and demoralize you. And don't believe them. So that was probably the most important advice I ever received, which is believe in yourself. And, and even when it's not smooth sailing, know that you have the potential to achieve that success again.
I have a whole thesis around this called Risk On, which is R is for relationships, and the I is for investing in yourself, and the S is stay your own course, right? Know your competition better than they know themselves, own your own mistakes, and never give up. And obviously, that's great advice. We're going to end on that note. It's funny you say that about this, because I think we live in a world where when you're an entrepreneur and you've done nothing, everyone roots for you. And when you're successful, people want to tear you down. It's a very awkward thing. And you have managed to take his advice and produce and do movies and create entertainment for people that people should hopefully look up your work. I'm seeing some of the stuff I've seen, and I will say some of it I'm not a fan of all the like horror stuff, but my wife would love it. If there's anyone that's ever going to kill me, it'll be my wife, because she watches all that stuff about like How to Kill Your Husband and all those murder mysteries and all your movies. I think she's probably seen every single thing on here. But I'm super glad, Gale, that you could join us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thanks to your team.